Now, I've been asked on my YouTube channel whether cryptocurrencies work with Gann Angles, so I thought I'd do this quick video and we'll find out. So this is Bitcoin against the US dollar. Now, before we do that, I'll just show you basically what you're looking for with angles because I think it's relevant. So this is my website, gann.co.uk. Go to client login, go to training videos, which you won't be able to do of course unless you're a client, but in there's some rules on angles. So we've got angles basics, which is really what Gann said, and then we've got advanced angles down there. And the one we want to look at is this one here, which is common mistakes, which I think I might have shown you in another video before, but let's play that.
Here's a few do's and don'ts and things that I think people do wrong. Basically, you're looking to buy on rising angles. So when the market forms a low, you draw your angle from the low, and your buying opportunity again is when the market comes back to the angle. So here, we've drawn an angle from a low, it comes down to the angle, and that there is a potential buying opportunity. And the same thing applies in a bear market, but it's the other way up. So shorting signals are where you draw angles down from a high, the market falls, and you're looking for the market to rise back to the angle for a potential short. So at this stage here, we'll be looking for the market to go down and a possible shorting opportunity. Now, a few things that people tend to do wrong are as follows, and it's basically this: it's actually rising to a rising angle. So you can see here that we've drawn an angle from a low, the market's fallen below the angle, and then it rises, and we get to the angle again, and people think that that is a good time to short the market. Well, it usually isn't. The reason being is it basically normally does the following. It might work there, or it might just go straight through. But if it does work, it tends to do this. It comes down, encourages people to go short of the market, and then it usually does something like that. And then it either tops out here and comes down, and it could be more than 3, it could be 3 or 4 times. Okay, so it could do something like that, or it just doesn't work at all. So I'm not interested when things rise to rising angles. And the same thing applies when you, I don't draw rising angles from tops. So an example of that would be this. So as you can see, in this particular case, we've drawn an angle from a high going upwards, which I would never do. But if you have, it might look something like that, and you might be tempted to think that's a good reason to short the market. But again, what usually happens, I mean, sometimes it works, but what usually tends to happen is the market actually goes higher. So it comes down, and then it goes back up again, and then it might go. Okay, but you never know exactly where the top's going to be, so I never do that. I never draw angles from highs to get future highs. Now, exactly the same rules apply on the downside. When you, to get shorting opportunities, well, you reverse the rules basically. It should be self-explanatory.
Okay, so there's a basic rule on angles. Now, I got asked a question somewhere. To do. There we go. Okay, so somebody asked me a question, which is, do you reckon angles work on cryptocurrencies, or is the market too fast, young to get a pattern going? Okay, so let's have a look. Now, first of all, you need to have software that does the master time, draws angles correctly, which I can guarantee you haven't. And also you need to know what the master time factor is for Bitcoin and US dollar. Now, you do that by looking at the past to work out what's worked with the benefit of hindsight, so that you can work out what works into the future. Now, this is only going to be short, so I'm not going to go and show you exactly what to do, but basically you just say which ones work the best. So we'll start here. Now remember, before this big rise up we had here, the scale looks more like this. Okay, so you can see the much bigger movements, and you can now see these movements. Now before that it was very difficult because it was hardly trading and not doing much, but again, if you rescale it you'll see it far easier. Anyway, we'll start here because we need to start somewhere. So I know what the master time factor is, so if we go to the first reaction that we can see, which is here, and we use the auto angle option, I've already worked out that it works on gamma angles. Now you won't be able to see that, so let's scroll up a bit and do that again. Now the very top one in the list, it says is 352 points by 1 unit of the master time factor, and it's telling you it's 99.6% the closest. The next one's 98% the closest, the next one's the 98% the closest, that one's a beta angle, that's an alpha, that's a delta, but gamma is the one I think this one works on from what I've done in the past. So they're saying it's base 11, which means if you keep dividing 352 by 2, eventually you get to 11. So it all works on odd numbers basically. So I'm not really interested because it's quite a high odd number. I really want the lower ones, unless I find some reason to use these higher odd numbers based on the past. So you might have found that base 11 angles work all the time. Well, if they do, then use it, for example. Now the closest one is right down here, which is a gamma, which is a base 3, which means it's based on the odd number of 3. 3 is a low odd number, so those are ones I really want to use. And if we put that angle on, that's the closest one to that low there. Now, what you do with an angle when it gets broken, you cut it. Now, that's a base 3. Now the next base 3 below that one, in fact the best way to actually do this is to do your base 1 angles first. So people go and talk about the 1 by 1 angle being Gann's most important angle and the 45-degree line. It is complete and utter twaddle. If you draw a 1 by 1 angle on a Bitcoin, now remember when Gann was around, things didn't trade in thousands and 1500s and things. Okay, so what people do to compensate is they move the decimal place on the scale. This is fundamentally completely and utterly wrong and changes all the angles to completely different angles. It is not true, it's a lie. But all you've got to do is just multiply 1 by 2, then 4, then 8 by 2 each time. So you get 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. And just pick one of those numbers and just see how steep it is. If we do a 64, it's not really steep enough. Twice that is 128. Yeah, and just start with one that looks roughly, depending on how you've scaled the chart, like 45 degrees. Twice 128 is 256. Okay, and you can see that the 256, just by doing the base 1 angles, eventually gives you this low here. The number that's above that one is 512, which is, if you kind of looked at those daily prices, and that's the problem with cryptos, there's not very much, and it does massive movements in days. Now, so the first reaction that it traded up was on a base 1 angle, 512. Half of 512, which you can put on before it gets there, is 256. The one below that one would be 128, because it's half of that number. Now, what's halfway between 512? Now you've got to do this base 1s, then base 3s, then base 5s, then base 7s. You can't just take base 7s and 5s and find halfway between. You've got to do it in the right order. So you do 1s, then 3s. So what's halfway between that one and that one? We'll add the two numbers together, divide by 2, and you get 384. If you keep dividing 384 by 2, eventually you get to 3. So it's based on the odd number of 3. Now you can see back here, this is the one I showed you the auto angle was made on before. Now I'm going to take that off in a minute because it's getting hard to see. Now what's halfway between 384 and 256? Well, if you add the two numbers together and divide by 2, you get 320. Now 320 is based on the odd number of 5. And that's actually, I'll take that off so it's easy to see. So can you see that all those days it traded up that base 5 angle? Now that is now an obvious trend line, so you would not want to buy it here, because anybody who's got a ruler and does technical analysis, yeah, will be looking to buy here. So there's no old saying what everybody knows isn't worth knowing, and most of what you've learned about technical analysis from anybody is, and I've been there and done it myself, is complete twaddle. Okay, you can believe that or not, I'm not going to, it's up to you. Now, what's halfway between 256 and 128? Well, it's another base 3 angle, because that's a base 1 and that's a base 1, so halfway between the two would be 192. So in the future, if it ever gets there, it might be a place to consider looking to buy the market. Okay, and we can do halfway between that one and that one, because angles to start off with are incredibly close together, and you can see anything you want to see. But what happens is, as time goes by, the distance between the angles gets bigger and bigger, and it gets harder to fit things in. But when you're back here, it's very easy to fit things in. Drawing angles from to get this low here, where would you draw it from? Well, we can't really use the low. You'd really have to start looking from there, because otherwise the angle would have to be cut, etc. So if I go to there and then I just go and do an auto angle just to see if it was made on the angle, and I can see if I've got the right master time factor. So that's based on odd number of 50 in the gamma one, so I don't really want to use that. And 448 is the closest, which is right down the list, which is a base 7, so I can use that one. Okay, so you can see that it's quite close to there, and by doing all the master time factors I found that this one was the best one. Again, you cut the angle. Now for the future, I can put on the angle halfway between these two. It's a good idea to make it maybe a weak line, a lighter colour, so you know that it's halfway between halfway. It just makes things easier. See, halfway between this one and this one is 160, and again, so you can see it easier. It doesn't mean they won't work, it's just easy to see halfway between halfway. So let's go to now to draw the steeper angles, because when you cut an angle you've got to cut it. Now I don't have to cut this one because it never got broken by the price. Okay, now if I was to do, say, a base 1 angle of 128, sorry about that, of 128, it's too flat. It's flatter than this angle here. Yeah, so I can't use that angle. So let's try twice that, which is 256, which is basically the same angle, so there's no point in having both of them on, so we'll take it off. What's twice that? Twice that is 512, which is a base 1 angle, and lo and behold, what happens? This fall here was made here. But it's incredibly difficult to trade because there's lots of other angles as well, but it comes shooting down, yeah, and it gets to the angle. Therefore, it's a point to consider buying the market. Twice that is 1024. Now when it got to this one, you cut the angle, it just went straight through. Remember, they're just decision points, and you can see that halfway between didn't work. But it's a day, yeah, and I don't do intraday trading. It's a mug's game. Only fools do it. The only people who make money out of intraday trading are the brokers from the commissions you pay, so they want you to trade as much as possible. Okay, so halfway between this base 1 and this base 1, as we already said, is 384. So that's a place, sorry, from the right low, is 384. So that'd be a place to watch. Halfway between this one and this one I can watch, which would be 448, to show me that it's halfway between halfway. Never buy an Apple mouse. Okay, so halfway between halfway, just make it a weak line just so you can see that it's halfway. It makes it easier to see. Halfway between this base 3 and this base 1 is 320. Again, make it a weak line just so you can see the halfway points easier. And to draw the steeper angles, we'd have to draw them from this low. So let's rescale the chart. Okay, and then we have the massive rise. Now, that video I played you at the beginning, I'm only interested on things falling to rising angles or rising to falling angles. So angles are useless when the market's just going straight up like a rocket. Yeah, that's just the way it is. But it's useful on when you're starting to fall. Now notice that now we've rescaled the chart, all these angles look very flat, but they didn't back here. Okay, that's why scales are important. All this rubbish about moving the decimal place means that if you move the decimal place, these lines will be up here somewhere. Okay, so don't rescale your scale. Anybody who tells you to do it just doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. So let's go to this low here. Now the first reaction is here. Now we know the master time factor is gamma, so we right click and find the closest gamma, and the closest gamma, that's base 17. Now remember, when you take very short periods of time, all these angles are incredibly close to each other, as I mentioned at the beginning. So if I take the closest one, which is this one with a different master time factor, and the closest gamma, which is this base 70, where was it? Oh, sorry, gamma's base 5 here. Can you see they're incredibly close together? But what happens over time is the distance increases between them, and it gets easier to see. So the closest one isn't necessarily the closest one over a short period of time. What is 512? It's a base 1 angle. If you keep dividing by 2, eventually you get to 1. So what do we do when an angle gets broken? We cut it, and we would cut it here. What's half of that base 1? Is 256. So that would be a place I'd be watching in the future for a change in trend. Now when it got there, it stopped on the day, but it didn't show any strength the next day. So it's just a decision level, just went straight through. Now that's a base 1, that's a base 1. What's halfway between a base 1 and a base 1? You add the two together, you get a base 3, which is 384. Okay, which is kind of that little kind of low there. Sorry, that can't be right. Sorry, I've got the wrong angles on. Those are beta angles. My mistake. Let's go to there. The closest gamma is a base, is a base 17. I don't want to use 17 unless I've got a good reason from the past to use it. The next one is 9. Again, the same thing applies. The closest gamma is this base 1, which you can't see, which is 2048 off the bottom of the screen. That's the closest one to there. But like I said, they're all very, very close at this stage. Okay, and then the market, it kind of breaks it, so you could cut it there, but it then regains the angle, comes back to it, goes back up again, and comes back to it. Now if you actually look at the videos I was playing at the beginning, there's one there that says when not to cut angles, which is a kind of example of that, and it's where you fall below an angle, you know it's working, it comes back to it, yeah, then it can be useful. But I don't really use it, so I would probably cut it with hindsight. You know, you might cut it there, for instance. Okay, so what's half of that number? It's a base 1, which is 1024, and when it got to the 1024, which is better, it just went straight through. It showed no resistance whatsoever, and if it's not going to work, that's exactly how I want it to break through. Now, what's halfway between this base 1 and this base 1? Add the two numbers up and divide by 2, and you get 1536. And where did the market stop? Exactly, the second most important odd number. Now, we're going to look at this point here. Why was it not a buy? Now, most people read a book and assume that the person who wrote the book knows what they're talking about. And then, because he's read the book, he becomes an expert, and then he tells other people that he's an expert, and he will tell you, in this particular case, that trend lines are good times to buy the market. Okay? And I tell people, never buy on an obvious trend line. Okay? It might work for a short period of time, but it doesn't last and it breaks through. And the way they do this, the people in charge of this world, the ones with all the money and can control the markets, because all this is just basically controlled, they can make the market go up, they can make the market go down, they give you little clues that they're doing it. So for instance, the Dow the other day, I'm doing this on the 8th of February 2018, the market fell exactly 666 points, and it was the 33rd day of the days from the beginning of the year. Well, 666 we all know is the number of the beast in the Bible, so it's a number that everybody knows about, and it's 33. 33 is basically a major number in Catholicism and in Freemasonry, which is basically the same thing. And they were basically telling the powers that be at the moment. Trump seems to be arresting everybody under the sun. He's telling the powers that be are telling him that we control the market, and you can believe that or not, but it happens all the time. There was a massive fall in 2008 and it fell exactly 77.7 points, and then after that it had a big fall. After the 666 point fall, it fell 150 points. Yeah, sorry, was it 1,500 points I think it was. You know, a massive fall. So they told you just before what we're going to do, and then they do it. Okay, again, I'm not going to argue about it, you can come to your own conclusions, but you can see that the angles work, okay, because it's all controlled. It's not because Gann had some mystical meaning. Gann was a high-level Freemason. He knew the way they control the markets. He was a 33-degree Freemason. If you read the wiki page, basically. So that is not a buy. That is a trend line. Never ever buy what other people can see, or as the old saying goes, what everybody knows isn't worth knowing. Now I actually did buy a little bit, 500 quid's worth, okay, but I wasn't very optimistic, but I just thought I wanted to buy some, because you can't, with this, it's just that's a day, you know, you can't trade this. It just moves too fast, and when it does go up off a level, it's already moved most of its movement before you can actually do anything. Okay, but you know, it could be useful to have a little bit. So let's go to the high. Now if you look at the very first video that I actually did on YouTube, then go to my channel, and this is it. Now the very first video I did was 9 years ago, and it's called WD Gann 3 Lesson 1. Now I only really started doing these YouTube videos when YouTube started, so you know, I've been doing this for donkey's years before that, and doing videos when the technology of the internet got quick enough to do videos. But basically this was the first one I put on, and it's just a basic introduction to Gann. And the first thing I found back in the 1980s that worked from a Gann point of view, and the first thing I found worked, was that falls of 50% are important to look for a change in trend. Now then you've got to decide if it's going to work at 50, which is, you know, a whole other subject, but 50% falls are important. In here I showed you the Wall Street crash, I showed you the FTSE from memory, then I showed you the FTSE again, and I showed you it working with hindsight. So I did the video about 50%, then showed you in the future that the fall in the FTSE was 50%. You know, so all without hindsight. I think there's no one else out there who doesn't do this without the benefit of hindsight. So just to prove that you can go and check, I'm not just making this up. So let's go to the high. Before the market gets to that level, this is what it would look like. Now when can I start taking away Gann's percentages? Well, anytime I want. I could take away 50% from this high when it was made here. Yeah, so I could go minus 50. But did it fall 50%? No, it didn't. I can watch 25, which is half of 50. How far did the market fall? It fell half of 50, which is 25, which is a Gann percentage. Yeah, I didn't say it was going to fall 50%. I said if it falls 50%. Okay, so we're going to do exactly the same thing, and we're going to do it from what turned out to be the all-time high. Okay, I had no reason for it to be the all-time high. I didn't see it, but basically, let's take away 50%. Okay. So that's a level in the future that if it gets there, I'd be looking for a possible reason to buy. It doesn't matter if it's Bitcoin or copper or duck futures or toilet duck futures or whatever. It doesn't matter. Okay, that's a level to consider, because that's a number. Yeah. So I would also be watching on the way down 25%. But when it got to 25%, and again this is the problem with Bitcoin, it just does these massive movements in a day. Well, when it got to 25%, which is a decision level, it just went straight through. No signal. So let's see what happens. Now it gets to 50%. Okay. Now I actually, like I said, I did buy a little bit here. I bought some right back here, but I mean I'm talking very small amounts, you know. I think about 500 quid's worth, so it doesn't really matter. I just did it as a have the skin in the game, so to speak. But the reason I shouldn't have done is because it was an obvious trend line, which I realised. Okay, but it had fallen 50%. The other reason that I shouldn't have bought it is that it had retraced probably the most famous technical analysis rule in the world, a retracement of 0.618, which is based on the Fibonacci Elliott wave, which is a complete and utter load of rubbish. Okay, I know a lot of people are going to be upset. I did it. I've been there. I used to do it. I thought I was pretty damn good at it. I didn't make any money out of it. Okay, so 0.618 between this low here and the major all-time high would be here. Okay, but that's not the one I want to look at. This low here, I could also do a 0.618 retracement, which is here. Okay, now When it got to this level here, it had fallen a Gann percentage, although it had broken it back quite a bit, and it had reached an obvious trend line, and it had retraced 0.618. The powers that be, who write the books that you read, that you think are how the markets work, now know exactly what you're going to do, or the vast majority of people who do technical analysis are going to do. They're going to start buying Bitcoin at this stage because of an obvious trend line and an obvious 0.618 retracement. So what's going to happen? It's probably going to work just long enough to get you into the market before it has a fast fall and catches you out. I can show you loads and loads of examples. That doesn't mean it doesn't work all the time. It's got to work sometimes, or they wouldn't get away with a scam. Okay, but basically, you know, this is what happened. It stops exactly at 0.618. So somebody will say, oh look, it worked at 0.618. No, it doesn't. What it did, it went up. It gets people into the market, and then we have the fast fall to catch you out. Yeah, and they've just made a load of money out of you. Okay, so never trade trend lines, never trade retracements of 0.618, even though I had a Gann reason, though I use this rule for reasons not to make a trade. Yeah, so the next level is here. So this is what it looks like today. I'll cut the percentage when it got broken. Now the next number below this base 1, now it just went straight through. If you do halfway between that one and that one, it went straight through. Yeah, you can see it. The next number below 1024 is 512. Now that 512, if I draw another one, it's just going to be in the same place, but it's actually drawn from this low because the price in this fall here never broke it. Okay, so I wouldn't want to trade the 512 because it's a trend line. I'd be more interested in this one or this one because they're not trend lines. Okay, now what's halfway between a base 1 and a base 1? I can put that on because that will be steeper than this base 1, and that is 768. If I drew it from the right place. So I've got to draw that from this low, so 768, and you can see that the market intraday on that day, you know, it did probably show some resistance, but it didn't, you know, it probably closed down at a low. I haven't looked. So and then we've just had this recent rise. So why has it gone up? Well, it's halfway between 768 and 512. It's 640, which is a base 5 angle with a correct master time factor, and it just happens to be exactly where the market goes and stops. Is it a buy? No, I don't think it is. Why? Well, the next major number below 50, and if you go on the website, you can request access to a webinar recording that I did back in 2014, and I go through the basics. So if you email me or you fill in the contact form, then I can give you access. But basically, the next major Gann number Gann talked about from major all-time high was 66.6. Okay, so you see the 666. Yeah, they like their numbers. The people who run the world are into numerology, and they make these numbers work. That's why it works. It doesn't work because there's some fundamental underlying, what's the word? Greek kind of. I can't think of a word for it, but you know, a cult thing. It's basically because they use these numbers. Yeah. So this would be a place where you'd be looking for a change in trend. It hit an angle, but it actually broke it by quite a bit, and it actually broke 50 by quite a bit, and I bet if you work it out, I bet you'll find it broke it by the same amount. Okay, so bear that in mind in the future. Now what you then do is you take this high here, and you also take this high here, and you work out in the future where certain set numbers basically coincide at the same place. Now I have other numbers that Gann didn't know about, but basically the next major Gann number he talks about, which I talk about in the webinar, is minus 75%. Now there is a number that's between this one and this one that Gann talked about but didn't know the reason, and it isn't physically halfway, so you don't add 50 and 66 up and divide by 2 and get halfway exactly. Halfway is not halfway from my point of view. Okay, it's around about here. Okay, now from this high here, if you do the percentages, you'll find there's only one place where they start to coincide, and it's actually this level here, and it's made in a base 7 percentage. Okay, and then from this high here, the only place where they coincide again is actually where this number is, and it's here. And it's actually the fall from here, to give you a clue, to here is the number that's halfway between this one and this one. Okay, which is about there. Okay, and it's so there's only one place at the moment where I can see based on the past where they coincide, and it would be this number here. Now I don't know when it's going to get there or if it's going to get there until it actually gets there. Now it would be nice if it got to it here, because it would be an angle, 384 base 3 angle. It can't get to this angle because it's in the past. It might get to this angle, the 320, but it'd have to get there right back here. So I'm not saying it will happen, but if it was to get to this percentage, which coincides with other percentages, and it was to get to 384, yeah, and it was here, then it would be quite interesting. If it was to get to it here, maybe not so. Or it might break it, these numbers, these constant Gann numbers, it keeps breaking it by a set amount. It might break that number by a set amount, which would put me off, to be quite honest, but then it might hit the 384 there, so I'll consider it. Yeah. So the question was, does it actually work on angles? Well, I'll let you come to your own conclusion.